Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Binge Chickens. Today we are looking at the, I would say, hottest new Netflix series, Bridgerton. And I've got Alex here with me. Hey, Alex.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, good. How are you?
I'm good. I've just switched you around because you are hosting this episode.
Well, just because I thought Bridgerton is more um, in my interest area than it is yours. So Bridgerton is Netflix's new series that was released on Christmas Day 2020, and we're now in Australia, at least it's the 2nd of January. So we've taken a bit over a week to actually watch it, but we did actually end up binging it. I mean, we started watching it probably on New Year's Eve and we finished it. So is it bingeable? We can say very
Absolutely.
early
Yeah.
on. Yes. Okay, so just some background on the series in case you have not watched it yet or don't know what we're talking about. It is a series set in the 1800s. You had the exact year, Alex.
I think we saw the first episode was set in, well, I guess the whole series is set in 1813, I think it is.
1813, yeah, that's it.
And we should say, so this first half is going to be non-spoilers for anyone listening who hasn't watched it yet.
Yes, non-spoilers for the first half, and we'll let you know when we're actually going to go into detail. Yeah, so set in the 1800s, very much looking at the upper class of society, British society of that time, known as the Ton. And it's based off a book series by author Julia Quinn. There's actually 8 books in the series, with each book following each of the Bridgerton children. So Bridgerton refers to the family that we are following in this season. And I do wonder if there'll be subsequent seasons, given the buzz around this. I do think so, and I would like to know what's happened, particularly given that final episode. Okay, so to get into our non-spoiler breakdown, what were your thoughts on Bridgerton prior to watching, Alex?
Well, you showed me the trailer, I think maybe a week or so before it came out, and sort of suggested that we'd be watching it for our podcast. And I'll admit, my first instincts or first thoughts were that it wasn't going to be the sort of show that I'd be interested in watching. I'm not really huge on period piece dramas generally, and so I watched the trailer and I thought, okay, it looks interesting enough that I will give it a go. But didn't really think it was going to be my sort of show. You sort of asked before, like, is this a bingeable show? And I think sitting down for the first episode, I was sort of saying to you that I'd have to watch it in very sort of small segments, but we ended up really tearing through the whole show.
Yes, I do remember when I suggested it, you kind of laughed at me, and I said, look, let's watch the first couple of episodes, and if you hate it, we can talk about why you hate it. And I would continue watching it myself, because period pieces are definitely my bread and butter. I love anything to do Jane Austen, Charlotte Bronte, all the Bronte sisters, and this is very much in that world, though a very modern approach to that world. And yeah, in the past, I've watched, Downton Abbey and Vanity Fair, which was out last year. I think I highly recommend Vanity Fair. It's a great series as well. So this is very much my genre of TV show. So I was very, very excited to watch it. Alex, definitely not. Have your thoughts changed after we've now watched the whole 8 episodes?
Yeah, I think one of the things that grabbed me the most about it was, and it was something that we sort of commented on watching that first episode, that it's almost like a blend of, I guess, Gossip Girl, and I sort of picked up on or felt like it kind of echoed even Desperate Housewives, where you've got that narrator, that's like kind of unseen narrator, kind of gossiping about the various families and their goings-ons. So I quite liked that it was a bit more modern like that. That sort of probably grabbed my interest a bit more than it otherwise would have, because I guess it added that more modern layer or modern theme to the show, which I quite liked, which made it very watchable for me.
Yes, and I think you can expect, it is produced by Shonda Rhimes, that it was going to be pretty good. I mean, we the last Shonda Rhimes show that we watched was How to Get Away with Murder, and we got through that pretty quickly.
Speaking of bingeable shows, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I kind of had high hopes for this as well in terms of having that hook, which is really there from that first episode, particularly with the elusive character of Lady Whistledown, which I don't think is a spoiler at this point. I mean, we know that there is that, as you said, unknown narrator who is narrating over everything. And yet trying to work out who she is. I mean, we do follow probably my favorite character of Eloise as she goes on that journey to find out if she can discover who Lady Whistledown is. But this first series focuses on the oldest Bridgerton daughter. So yeah, there's 8 Bridgerton children, 4 boys, 4 girls, and the oldest daughter is Daphne, and her escapades with the Duke. Did you have any characters that you particularly stood out for you?
Probably, yeah. Look, I'd probably say similar to you. Eloise was definitely up there because, of course, like you said, this is a family that we're following through, I guess, the courting season. I guess I kind of tried to understand. I guess they all come down to London for the courting season, where the older daughters are trying to get married off, and the older sons are trying to find someone to take over the family with. So there's various different characters that you can get caught up with, and I was trying to keep track of all the different names. So Eloise probably was one of my favorites. I quite liked Penelope. I think
so Penelope isn't a Bridgerton. So
no.
Just for those who maybe haven't watched it yet and they're just trying to gauge their interest, yes, the main family we follow are the Bridgertons, hence the show name, but we also we meet other families within the circle. The other family that we probably closely actually interact with are the Featheringtons. Oh my gosh, that's a mouthful. The Featheringtons, who are like the polar opposite to the Bridgertons in terms of costuming, and the Bridgertons are very much that old money. I mean, can you say old money in the 1800s? They're very much a proper part of society, where the Featheringtons are kind of on the fringes, and that they're that try hard kind of family to get into that world. I mean, they're in it. They're definitely in it, but they definitely face a lot more adversity to the Bridgertons.
And if we were to draw a comparison to another modern sort of soapy sort of show that we've watched, the OC, you could almost call, the matriarch of the Featherington family is very much in the mold of a Julie Cooper.
She is a Julie Cooper. She even looks like her. That kept blowing my mind, which was very entertaining. But yes, there's a lot of modern comparisons, I think, within this that you can make, because it is very much a modern show that's just set in that 1800 period. So you do have a lot of modern ideas coming through. So there's a lot of talk about feminism, particularly from our Eloise and Penelope, and wanting to be working women who don't want to get married. But then you even said the boys as well, pushing those traditional roles that they're assigned. I mean, as we've got Daphne as the oldest girl, who is trying her hardest to be that traditional female in society, because she knows that's the only way forward for her sisters and her family. So, looking to get married and to marry well, to ensure that her sisters also have that opportunity, having another 3 below her. But then you also have her brother, the eldest Bridgerton, Anthony, who, after their father's passing, is now the Viscount, or Viscount, as my head keeps reading it as, also trying to fit that mold, but then also challenging it in their own sort of way. With the younger siblings, such as Benedict, who I absolutely adore as well. It's my other favourite. It seems to be the second boy and girl that I quite enjoy following their stories, because they're the ones who are really trying to go and find their own path and not be limited to what society says they need to do.
Well, yeah, I
Um,
was going to say, I mean, the male Bridgertons as well, I quite like in terms of, as you've mentioned, Benedict. He's the artist, isn't he? Or am I?
yes,
No, hang on. Have I got them backwards? No, yep. So Benedict's the artist, and then Colin's the
he's
one
just
who's
the
friends with
younger one.
Penelope.
Yes, he's Penelope's
Yes.
friend.
Okay. Yes, I like Colin as well. They're both. I think one of the things this show does very well is it does create very distinct characters. So even though I'm really terrible with character names and I forget character names, I was still able to I never felt like I was watching a scene and thinking, which character am I following now? Like they were very distinct characters with their very distinct sort of personalities, and it was set up quite quickly and quite well in the show. So it made it quite easy to follow what was going on.
Yes. Now, as I said, yeah, they do introduce some modern ideas in there, so like that feminism. Um, there's a really like a diverse cast, which is really great to see. But again, with Shonda Rhimes as an executive producer, I wouldn't expect anything else. We do have very much, that diverse cast, and a whole range of characters, which I think will appeal to anyone and everyone, because it's going to be a character that you enjoy their escapades of. Now, you did mention before that it is similar to Gossip Girl. So, who would you recommend? I mean, if you like Gossip Girl, you're gonna like this. And there is a bit of a difference between this and Gossip Girl because you don't have to wait however many seasons there were of Gossip Girl. I get up in the end, until the end of the whole show to find out who our narrator is. We find out very early on. Well, we find out very on, not very early on. We found at the end of this season who Lady Whistledown is. And it's very, I guess, satisfying to have that knowledge as an audience rather than having that being left. So yeah, I would recommend it to anyone who likes Gossip Girl or those sorts of things.
Yeah,
Who would you recommend it to, Alex?
I think that's right. I think it's one that I think if it was more strictly period piece, I would say it's just appealing to a very select group of people. Like you quite like your period pieces, and we have friends,
Yes.
male and female, who really love their period pieces. I'm not necessarily saying it's just for one particular gender, but I think this appeals to a broader group of people by adding in both, as we're sort of saying, these modern elements, but then also that mystery that kind of links through the first season. I think you're right. I think it's good that we do find out at the end of this season, purely because it adds that layer now of, for season 2 and beyond, we know something that the characters don't. So I think that actually adds a really interesting layer.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, yeah. Sorry.
Sorry, I'm talking over you. It would be interesting now. It's like to re-watch it and see if we can find, like, spot out Lady Whistledown, because it's very much something you're not looking for, and then now you know who it is. I'm like, I just want to go back and identify like where they were when these events are happening and they're being reported on.
Yeah, so I
Yes,
think
but
it appeals to it can appeal to a broad audience. I think people, if people give it a chance, I think for me it probably grabbed me around, like I enjoyed the first few episodes, but I think it really grabbed me maybe halfway through the season as the plots are really starting to develop, and
yes,
we were sort of past laying the groundwork and we were into the real juice of their plots. I think that's when it really grabbed me. So I think it's definitely a show that anyone can really enjoy. I think we've sort of seen the comment, it's not a sort of show to watch with your parents. There is
holy
a fair,
crap, do not
there
watch it with your parents. Do
there is
not,
there
this is a
there is a
PSA.
yeah, there's
Do not
a
watch it
fair
with your
few
parents.
sex scenes in it. I mean, there's not. I wouldn't say there's much gratuitous nudity. I think the nudity is handled quite well, but there are, a lot of sex scenes depicted. So,
Oh
um,
gosh, yeah.
it's interesting in that sense as well. It's a bit more, I guess, in your face than you'd normally get in a period piece, which I think is also a bit of the modern twist that they've put on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think for a show that, as we started out, and I was sort of saying, 1 hour runtime for the episodes, they do fly past once you're really into the plot.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's something you actually complained about when we first started watching it. You looked at the episode length and went, I'm not going to be able to get through this. But by the time you actually got through episode 1, I think you really did.
My attention span is atrocious.
your attention span for period pieces is atrocious. I distinctly recall Downton Abbey, you could get as far as the opening credits before falling asleep. So
Look, it was a great way. If I was struggling to fall asleep on any given night, put an episode of Downton Abbey on, and I was out like a light.
yeah, definitely. But yeah, I recommend it basically for anyone. Give it a go. As I don't watch it with your parents. We watch one episode for parents, and I was awkward the whole time, so I do not recommend it. But yeah, give it a go. It is actually really entertaining, and I'm sure, Alex, despite your concerns at the beginning, I mean, yes, you can say it's a period piece, but you know, if I'm watching Pride and Prejudice, for example, it's very different to what we're seeing in Bridgerton. Same world. The ideas are so much more modern. It is very much a modern show, just set in that context. With those contextual ideals coming from things.
Yeah, and I guess one other thing that we haven't mentioned yet in terms of how it took on that more modern interpretation is also the music, which I thought was really well done. There's a few really sort of, you know, you get your modern pop songs that have been sort of reimagined as orchestral symphonies in the background at their balls and things like that, which it sort of reminds me a bit in Westworld when you got the piano in the saloon would be playing a modern song, which, you know, each episode it was kind of fun to pick what song they were covering that week.
Yes.
So similarly in this, having that gave that extra layer of, it feels more modern, but it feels very fitting for the time as well.
Yeah, you've got those Vitamin String Quartet covers of modern songs. So if you are going to watch it, look out for some Taylor Swift, some Ariana Grande, some Shawn Mendes.
Maroon 5.
Maroon 5, yeah, it really does. Yeah, it really, I mean, it appeals to a modern audience, but still keeping it in that world, which I think this show does really well in terms of subject matter, as well as, yeah, the music. So, Alex, would you watch season 2 before we end this non-spoiler summary?
Yeah, I think it left things in a really good place to sort of bring people back for a season 2. I think you sort of alluded to at the start that there's 8 books following each of the different children. So presumably season 2 won't have the same focus as season 1, which was very much a focus on Daphne and her exploits with Simon. But I think the meat of the plots for the other characters was such that, you know, depending on which family member we're following in season 2, I think there's enough there to hook us back in for their plot for the next season to bring audiences back.
Yeah. Well, I think it's already clear that I would definitely watch season 2. I think we finished it yesterday. I sat there and went, I need season 2 now, please. So very much here for season 2. So I think we'll end our non-spoiler review now. So if you haven't watched it yet and you were just trying to get an idea of whether you should watch it, yes, watch it. Oh, what were you going to say, Alex?
No. I was just saying. So there's the sort of drawing the line. That's the pause. So if anyone hasn't seen it, that's where they can sort of sign off and go binge it and then come back for part 2 of this, where we can dig into the spoilers.
Yeah. So if you haven't watched it yet, go watch it. Then come back and listen to the rest of this. If you have, keep listening. We'll give you a couple of seconds to. I feel like we need filler music here. Lift music, Jeopardy music, or some modern string versions of some songs. Maybe some Harry Styles songs for season 2. Anyway, spoiler review. Okay, Alex, let's get a bit more in depth with what actually happens. I feel like we were very vague in that first half, so if you persevered, good on you. Okay, so we already said this season focuses on Daphne. What were your thoughts on Daphne? I think we can start dissecting from there.
I think Daphne was an interesting character. She sort of starts off as somebody where I didn't feel like she was a very distinct person. She was very sort of typecast as your stereotypical sort of girl coming of age, going off to these sort of debutante ball or whatever it would be to find a suitor. And she's very much sort of in her mother's shadow. But I think very quickly through the episodes, once she starts her first it's a ruse with Simon, and then as sort of I guess one of the more predictable elements of the season is obviously we sort of look at them and say, okay, well, they're obviously going to fall in love.
Yeah, that was something that annoyed me. It was very
it was
obvious
a
from
bit
episode
cliched.
one.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was a bit cliched. But once we sort of got into that, and she sort of came out of the shadows and into being her own person, there's sort of a controversial moment a bit later on that we'll probably have a bit of a discussion about in itself. But from her character point of view, I did find her story arc over the season really interesting in how she sort of developed much more independence as a person in her own right.
Yeah, I feel like she's very much a stock character that you would expect in a 1800s England piece, that she's our girl who is there to get married. She's very much your, she's more your Jane from Pride and Prejudice character, who is the oldest and wants to marry well, and that's her like objective in life. That's what she wants. She wants to be presented, have her debut to society, and have that chance to be out and have the men come calling. And you see in that episode 1 that her overbearing brother almost brings that to a complete halt in terms of suitors visiting and actually making her an offer, which then leads that ruse with the Duke of Hastings, Simon. I think we should also point out that Daphne is given the title of the Incomparable. She's the diamond of the season, and is expected to marry.
That's from the Queen, is it?
That was from Queen Charlotte, yes.
Yeah.
I love the Queen. She just gave me so much I don't care vibes about everything. But then we also get that insight in, I think, episode 4.
It was 4 or 5, I think. At the Queen's life.
Queen. Yeah, where we get the Queen, I think it's episode 5. Just looking at my notes. Yeah. Where we see her own situation. Sorry, this show is fascinating because we're not just following Daphne. We get a glimpse into everyone's who's in that main ensemble's lives. So you get that glimpse into Queen Charlotte's and King George with potentially dementia or some sort of mental illness that's debilitating him and their relationship. And you very much get that kind of on running joke throughout the show whenever someone comes in and says, "Oh, Your Highness, it's the king," and they're like, "Is she dead?" And she replies, "Is he dead?"
Yeah.
As if she's waiting for him to die. But then we see that insight there, which kind of gives you that understanding as to why she's like, "Is he dead yet?" Or she distances herself because obviously being too close is causing pain. Sorry, I've just gone on a whole rant about the Queen, but this is the whole show. And like you see their public persona, and then you get that insight a bit more into their mind and things like that. For most of the characters, you see it with the mum, Violet, Bridgerton. You see it with Penelope, Featherington.
What's the dressmaker's name?
Delacroix.
Yeah. Well, I just find it interesting that
Daphne Delacroix.
Yeah, that we're sort of talking about the character.
No, Daphne. Genevieve. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong name on my list. Genevieve is.
But all the way from the Queen down to the lower class, so to speak, with the maids and the dressmakers and so on, we sort of get an insight into various people's lives, and it's such a deep show in that sense that we could talk for hours about each of the characters because there's quite compelling and detailed stories for each of them woven through the season. Yeah.
So before we go into like key, I guess we'll touch on 2 or 3 key things that happen throughout the season. Any characters you particularly liked, disliked? As I just said, I really enjoyed the majority of the characters because you get kind of layers to them.
I think
that main ensemble.
Yeah, I think Simon was a really complex character, and we'll talk a bit in a second, like you're just saying, about some of the key themes of the season or key ideas, mainly revolving around him and Daphne, I suppose. But I found his character really complex, and I think it was helped by, was it episode 2 or episode 3, we got the flashbacks of his childhood with his father and sort of the reasons that he was the way he is, because he's sort of presented in the first episode as just very standoffish and he's a rake, which was your favorite new term learned in this season. Him and Anthony are both basically rakes. They're kind of just going around doing their own thing. But he like Daphne goes through a complete kind of character arc in this season where he develops into a really interesting and complex character. So I think when you have characters where my favorite thing in any show that I'm watching is if you can have a character where you can disagree with what they do at any particular moment, but you can still understand why they do it or why they think that way. It means that the show has done well at creating a character that is complex. And I think he's a really good example of that.
Mm-hmm. I liked Lady Danbury as well as another character. And I mean, we don't get too much into her backstory, but she does tell Simon, particularly with his harsh upbringing, with his family, that she was scared of being out in society and had to create this like fearful image of herself, the way she dresses, the way she acts, her manners, in order to, face the world. And you do see that she's very sharp-tongued and on everything. I mean, there's a line where she says that where she's talking to Simon about the divide between him and Daphne after they're married, and she's like, I have everything, because she does. And there is that question from Eloise that maybe she's Lady Whistledown. I mean, we do find out later on that she's not, but you understand why. But yeah, all those characters have those really deep, I guess, layers, whatever. A character I was a bit about was Anthony. I mean, I know he's trying his best as the Viscount, but he's just, I don't know, he's an interesting one. He's one we probably didn't delve much into. So I feel I don't know much about him outside of his affair with his mistress.
Well, I was going to say, I think he's in a lot of ways he's pretty two-dimensional in this season, like you're saying, and I think that's maybe deliberately done because, like we were saying, I think season 2 is going to be a focus on him, so it's almost deliberately hasn't gone too deep into his plot because it's going to be expanded so much in the following season.
Yeah, book 2 in the actual book series is about Anthony. So I expect season 2 would be about Anthony. And I did say to you when we finished watching it, I don't know how I'd feel watching a season 2 that is focused on Anthony, because I don't know how I feel about him as a character yet. He's extremely toxic, really.
And that's why I think it's almost deliberate. Yeah. Because it's almost like it's almost deliberately done so that when it's about him next season, you can go back and watch season 1 in a completely new way.
Yeah.
Or presumably. That's
which is interesting.
For me, it probably. Well, I was just going to say quickly. For me, a character that I didn't really like was what's her face's husband, Featherington.
Yes, no, not is he
Archibald? Is it? Baron Featherington. Yeah, Archibald. Yes, Archibald. Yeah. I found his character very interesting. Well, sorry, I'll say interesting, but a character that I didn't really like because since we're talking spoilers, there's a scene where, well, he's very standoffish throughout most of the show and very dismissive of his wife and daughter's efforts going to the balls and so on. And we sort of learned that that's because of his gambling debts, where his family fortune's basically gone. And we compared the Featherington family to the Coopers, and it does remind me a lot of Jimmy's plot. Well, there, that's true. But it sort of echoes Jimmy's plot in that first season of the OC. But unlike Jimmy, who is sort of noble, I don't know if you'd call it noble to run away, but ignoring the OC, Archibald instead sort of confesses to his wife and then goes right back to sort of being quite sneery towards her and as if he hasn't really felt sorry for what he's done to the family. And then we sort of get the conclusion of the season is him just back to his old tricks, trying to make his debts go away by, taking any shortcut that he can find, and ultimately for his own demise. We presume anyway. I think I wouldn't put it past the show to have him be alive in some capacity, because I think the way it's worded is that it appears that he's dead, So maybe he's just missing. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was kind of cleared up, but yeah, he was probably my least favorite character in that sense.
Yeah, I did.
And I think that's probably deliberate. That's probably deliberate.
Yeah, I don't think we're meant to like him.
Yeah.
I think that's meant to then garner us more sympathy for Mrs. Everington and her daughters, because even though she's that Julie Cooper character, and she's very, up herself and comes across as, they wear the most obscenely patterned
Garish, yeah.
dresses, which are awful. Which, just sidetrack, the costumes in the show are beautiful. And the colouring is very specific to each of the families. So a lot of the Bridgertons wear blues, and you find the Duke wears red, but when he does marry to Daphne, he starts to go into those blues and greens. Interesting. But the Everingtons, again, as I said earlier, they're a bit more of like that opposite family. So they wear lots of bright pinks, bright oranges, bright greens, very heavy patterns. And I feel like at the beginning you're not meant to be on their side, but I did find, but I did feel sympathy for them, even with the way that she treated Marina. So there's a character of Marina Thompson, who is Archibald Beverington's niece, who comes to stay with them for the season. And we later find out that she's pregnant. And in those times, being unwed and pregnant is a no-no. And so, Mrs. Feverington tries to, any trick in the book really, to get Marina off her hands, so that, they don't have a scandal and her daughters aren't affected by the fact that their niece is pregnant out of wedlock. And how mean she is to Marina, locking her in the room for pretty much most of that second episode, forcing her to potentially marry some older man who's not going to ask questions when she pops the baby out in 7 months' time, or 6 months' time. I still felt some sympathy for her at the end because her husband was so horrible.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was an interesting, just like looking at some key plot points of the show. We've got the Marina Thompson pregnancy, which really brings in that element of why I guess Daphne's so eager to marry, because at that time, and this is mentioned throughout, particularly in that games night with at Lady Danbury's, and at the swinger party that Benedict goes to, post that women are only granted freedom and like liberties to do what they please once they are married, and before that they have to follow very strict protocols. Otherwise, shame will be brought upon them and no one will marry them. And that is the main goal for all these women, except Eloise, is to get married so that they, have someone to care for them. But also, once Daphne discovers once she's married to the Duke and is talking to the other women who have all these arrangements with their husbands and things about not even living together and doing whatever they like because they are married, they're free from scandal, if that makes sense, or free from general scandal. I'm sure if they were to run off with another man, that would cause scandal, but we do see that a lot of them aren't necessarily sleeping with their husbands and they're still getting away with it because they're married. So yeah, that's a very big theme that follows through this whole series, is that idea that women are subject to a lot of expectations that aren't necessarily placed upon the men, as we see the comparison between the Bridgerton brothers and sisters. But there are some expectations for the Bridgertons, and this is why Anthony has issues with Sienna, the opera singer, and his mistress. It's something that really like heavily goes throughout, and this is where it comes back to Daphne and her desire to marry and to have children, because that's the expectation of society, as far as she's aware. Do you have anything to say about that before I continue on? Because I've got something else to add.
Not really on that. I did find it interesting. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned there the swingers party, and I'm going to be interested to see how that plot develops because I think that's kind of an interesting subplot with is it
Benedict.
Benedict?
I love
Um,
Benedict.
and sort of the world that he's found himself in that's very different to the one that he was the one that he's expecting in society. I feel like back then being an artist in a family wouldn't especially in that sort of upper class family wouldn't really be seen as a noble pursuit.
Can I just chime in there?
Yes.
It's all on the firstborn. This is why Anthony's so sour.
Mm.
And it does get explained in the show that once, I think to Benedict or to Colin, maybe it was to Benedict, that once, yeah, I think it was to Benedict at that, I think, party, at one of the parties, because then he goes back to the jewel and starts freaking out because Anthony is like, if I die, you will be the head of the family. So the head of the family has expectations, particularly now that their dad's dead. He has to look after all the family. He's expected to marry well. So there's a lot of expectation on Anthony, as much as there is on Daphne, I would say. Or there's more so on Daphne because she needs an advantageous marriage to be able to, live a happy life. But even all these expectations. Once they get down to the second and third child, they can do whatever the hell they like.
Yeah, but
there's
even
some expectations, but
Colin's still sort of following society, and Colin's still looking to marry and do the right thing per society, whereas Bennett is definitely sort of the black sheep. And look, Colin wants to travel, he wants to do that sort of stuff as well, but he still feels very much more like he's got that proper idea of his place in society. Whereas Benedict seems very much the black sheep of the family and is off doing his own thing, being an artist, which is very much, I think, a more rebellious sort of profession. And to then find this whole sort of underbelly of society is a good thing for him, I think. It's a real sort of eye-opener to him that actually, like you're saying, particularly for women, but for men as well, that, they can exist with that sort of level of freedom so long as they tread carefully and follow society in public, as the artist, I think, sort of says to me, I think it's in the last episode, that, yes, he's risking his status every day to be with who he wants to be with, but, finding the ways to do it is possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I do find it interesting as well, though, because all these people see each other at these grand events, like the parties and the balls and the opera, and then they all go to, like, Lady Danbury's party, where they're all drinking and gambling, the women, and talking about how they're not actually with their husbands, and that being married allows them to have that freedom. And then you've got Benedict going to the party, and he, sleeps with the other artist's wife, and then goes to a party with them the next day and makes the connection that, I slept with his wife and they're okay with it. So there's all these things that are bubbling under the surface that no one acknowledges, but everyone knows goes on. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting society. Okay. What else happened? I said the Queen is great. I do want to talk about Lady Whistledown, but might leave that to the end because we'll talk about who she is, and I want to talk about.
I think that's sort of because that hooks into the final scene, so that's probably the best thing to talk about last.
So, do you want to talk about Daphne and Simon's relationship?
Yeah, I think we really interestingly have slightly different perspectives, which I think is quite natural, and I think it's sort of the design of the show. Like I was saying earlier, that the benefit of having well-written characters or well fleshed out characters is that you can disagree with their motives but understand why they've done them. And so similarly, I think different people can sort of side with different characters in situations like this. We find out about Simon's upbringing and his father and the fact that he doesn't want to have children because of who his father was. And then you've got the, I guess, naive Daphne not really understanding how children are made, who then misinterprets when Simon says that I will not have kids or I cannot have kids. She hears cannot as physically cannot, whereas he means it as I couldn't bring myself to have children. So the marriage is sort of set off on rocky footing from that alone, and that misinterpretation.
Yeah, before you get into that thing, which I know you're going to discuss in a second, I was fascinated by the fact that these girls had no idea. And as someone who's read a lot of, I guess, literature that was written at that time, you know, as I said, I am into period pieces and things like that and watched a lot of things. So it's something I've never really thought about because it doesn't get talked about. You have all these great romances, and at the end of the novel, the heroine gets married and they live happily ever after. And like this idea of actually having children, the expectation is there. It's never actually discussed as to what happens or how that happens and things like that. You know, it's very much, and this is made clear, particularly with that Daphne and Lord Burbrook storyline, that women aren't allowed to be with men on their own. There always needs to be a chaperone because otherwise people will assume that they've gone and, I don't know, had sex in the bushes, apparently, because they're all super into that. But that idea of, I guess, purity and innocence is very much really important. So I find it fascinating that, like, these guys have no idea how, you know, how to have babies. So when Eloise and Penelope find out about Miss Thompson being pregnant, there's that whole thing where they're like, can someone please tell me how babies are made? And no
How
one
someone who's not
does.
married can have a baby because they think it's
Yeah, so someone who's not married
physically
can have a baby.
unable.
They think that, that blew my mind, the lack of education.
And the mishaps
I
it
don't know, that
causes.
was
And,
very,
you know,
I don't know exactly the historical there to try and read the fiction.
Daphne and her mother have that whole conflict throughout the second half of the season because Daphne's so furious with her mother, because if her mother had just bothered to explain it correctly to her, she would have been much better informed and much more prepared for both for her marriage in general, but also for understanding or having a sense of understanding the reluctance that Simon has, that perhaps that there wouldn't have been that miscommunication.
I just find it fascinating that they think you have to be married to have a baby. And then Penelope talks to Miss Thompson. Miss Thompson's like, it's when you're in love. So like, that's super vague too. I was like, if this was what was actually happening at the time, no wonder everyone was randomly popping up accidentally pregnant. No one's been told anything. And this is why sex education is important, just quietly, because otherwise, it just baffled me. And the fact that the mum couldn't even just say plainly, this leads to this, and this is what you're expecting on your wedding night. It was very vague. She talked about the dogs and how they did it, and it's very natural. And we see that Simon and Daphne find it very natural throughout the whole of episode 6. It's basically just them all over the house. But yeah, as you said, Daphne just doesn't know exactly how it works. And finally, thanks to her her lady's maid, sorry. I think her name was Rose.
Yes.
Yes, Rose. She finally gets the plain explanation as to this is how you have kids, and realizes that Simon is not allowing that to happen, to put it plainly.
So I guess there's then two aspects to this topic that we can go into. One's more controversial than the other. I guess maybe we'll start with the less controversial one. And I'd be curious to know what's your view on their marriage, and who trapped or who tricked who into marriage.
I honestly, they annoyed me towards the end. Towards the end, I was very much over the Daphne and Duke. As attractive as the Duke is, I was very much over them and their plot line, because it was, oh, woe is me, I've trapped you in this marriage and I'm the bad guy. And then the other one being like, no, I'm the bad guy. And then them making up and then having that whole fight all over again. And that got very old very quickly, because we knew at the end of it that they were a love match, as they kept being called. So we know that they love each other despite their attempts to ignore the feelings themselves. Everyone could see it. And that got a bit irritating for me as an audience member, because it just kept the same fight. It felt like kept happening until I don't know. I feel like just if they actually communicated, let's be honest here, communication is key to any relationship. They actually talk to each other and didn't just ignore each other and be sullen and silent. They might have actually, dealt with all of this stuff before it actually happened. Though I do think it does come down to a bit of semantics. When Simon says, I cannot have kids, it does imply that he's physically unable to have kids. So it makes sense why Daphne thought that he was physically unable. And that's when she accepted it, that, yeah, we'll never have a child, but that's like, it's of no fault of either of us. Like, that's not something that we can remedy when we find out that what he actually meant is, I will not have kids.
Yeah. Whereas I think I take a slightly different view on it, where I look at it as he was so prepared to die. He was prepared to duel her brother and so prepared to die and he made it as clear as he could to her that he would not marry her. He couldn't put her through a life of misery like that. He couldn't ask her to sacrifice her desire to have children just to be with him. He couldn't have made it any clearer that she should find somebody else, she should marry somebody else. Yes, he could have made it clearer in terms of his reasoning. He could have said that I don't want to have children because of my horrible father and I want my bloodline to end with me. He could have very plainly spoken, but
communication.
Clearly a very sore topic for him, though. Clearly, it's when Anthony and him are trading barbs at the gentleman's club, and as soon as Anthony mentions his father, he gets pretty pissed off as well. So it's clearly a very sore topic for him. That he was trying to say it as plainly as he could without upsetting himself. I think the fact that she then said to him, I don't care, we don't need to have children, I love you anyway, that was her sort of accepting that she wasn't going to have children. So from his point of view, that's why then afterwards he was saying, well, great, I can't believe that I found somebody who is happy to have this marriage and it's just us. You surprised me, but this is fantastic. She's the one.
Can't. Not will not. It's semantics. It really comes down to the choice of words.
It is semantics, but it's the fact that she's accepted a life without children. He thinks she's accepted a life without children. Whereas from her point of view, if there's even the slightest possibility that they could have children, she would jump at it. And that's clearly not the perception he had of her accepting his marriage proposal or accepting marriage to him, even with all of the discouragement that he gave her.
Yeah. I mean, look, he's broken, and we do see, like, Daphne's speech at the end is very much an appeal to that broken side of him. And she's like, I don't care that you're not perfect. Like, no one's expecting you to be. We all have our flaws. And I love you for yours, regardless of what they are. We see that kind of breakthrough. But it wasn't like poor Daphne had to go and find out all this information for herself to be able to work out how to appeal to Simon. Like, I know, has had that awful upbringing with his dad, obviously does not feel like he's good enough for anyone or anything. But because he didn't share that, it just led to all that drama. And, she had to go talk to Lady Danbury. Well, she didn't have to talk to Lady Danbury, but she had to go read the letters that he had written to his father to get that understanding, and talk to Lady Danbury, who then kind of went, I pushed him, but he had to make that realization himself. And that's when Daphne goes, okay, this is what I can do to get him to realize where I'm coming from. They're both stubborn. Both stubborn, very annoying.
Yeah. What's your take then on, I guess, probably the most controversial scene in the series, which is when it's sort of the culmination or the climax, for lack of a better word, of this fight, where she essentially forces him to not pull out of her whilst they're having sex. And I guess there's been a bit of talk online and a bit of feedback on the series that this essentially amounts to a rape of him by continuing even without his consent. And I guess I'll let you go first.
I, again, go back to what I said before, if they had actually communicated with each other and actually talked rather than assumed that each of them was the villain and sat there sullenly and just got angry and didn't actually talk to each other, none of this would have happened. Like, it really came down to that communication. Is it right? I don't think what Daphne did was right at all. There should have been an open conversation rather than trying to like trap him. But then like she was angry at him afterwards for not communicating with her, which I think is justified. But then he was also angry at her because she broke his trust, essentially, also 100% justified. Again, there wouldn't have been a show if they actually talked to each other. Let's be honest here.
Yeah,
if they'd actually had an open conversation, none of these plot points would have happened.
I think,
and there would have been no show.
Sort of going a bit more meta with it, because I think there was a bit of criticism that the show didn't really address the aftermath of that scene. I think that's not quite right. I think they do, because of the fact that Simon is so angry at her and feels so betrayed by her. Is at least in part due to specifically what she's done, and they have for most of that next words. They have for most of that next episode the distance, that sort of the dread or the anticipation for whether or not she's actually pregnant, and it's that sort of unspoken sort of frustration between them about that, because it's essentially been done without his consent. So I don't think it's right to say that it doesn't get addressed at all. And yes, communication would definitely help things, but at the end of the day, that doesn't really excuse, just because he doesn't want to talk to her about it doesn't then give her the right to do what she did. So I think it's a really important scene, because I think it shows a side that doesn't normally get portrayed or discussed, which can be that this sort of thing can happen from both sides. So yes. I actually didn't think it was as negative a scene as some people seem to think it was. I can understand some people might be upset by it. I don't actually know.
Maybe put a trigger warning or content warning.
I was going to say, I don't actually know if there was a content warning at the start of the episode for
because we binged it and just went through every episode.
I know they normally have the content warning for nudity and sexual references and all that sort of thing. I don't know if they specifically called out this scene, which if they haven't, they probably should. So I can understand why some people would be upset.
Yeah. It's just, as I said, by the end of the season, I was very much over Daphne and
well, I think that's the idea, though, isn't it? That this is Daphne's book. So by the end of this season, we should feel like we've seen their plot and that it's done, and we don't need. We shouldn't be left in season 2 when we're watching Anthony's plot thinking, "Where's Daphne and Simon? Let's go back to them." Like this season just has a very closed story.
Well, it does, and like the season ends with Daphne having a son.
Yeah.
So she does end up actually.
And they all live happily ever after.
And they all live happily ever after, which I found so unbelievable, because I feel like we had all that anger at each other about her trying to, basically force him to have a child with her, and then in the last episode everything's all fine and dandy and they're having a kid at the end of it. It would have been more believable for me to have like more of a time period of maybe having Daphne in season 2 having the baby rather than right at the end of season 1. I do get they're kind of tying up that plot line, but if they're going to do a season 2, we're going to see these characters anyway. So
I was actually surprised, because I did feel like that scene was meant to be set a couple of years later, but clearly it wasn't. It
wasn't. If it was, it wasn't made clear. It just felt very like tacked on at the end. I don't know.
That wasn't even the last scene of the series of the show, was it?
It was, because we found out who Lady Whistledown was, and then it jumped to that. Yeah. So
maybe it is a bit later then.
Yeah, but they didn't specify that. So I just found it very odd to have it tacked on there. I would have. I mean, for me, I would have preferred if they just ended it with the Lady Whistledown reveal and left it at that, and started season 2 maybe with. Anthony going off to Cliveden with his mum because Daphne is about to give birth.
Yeah, I think I didn't realize it was that way around. I think you're right. I think if it ended with Whistledown's revelation instead, I think having that at the very end is they all lived happily ever after sort of message, when that's not necessarily the case.
While we're talking about women taking advantage of men, Quickly, the Colin Marina plot.
Mm-hmm.
Marina not telling Colin about being pregnant, because this leads us into Lady Whistledown.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think about that?
It was a very complex plot because there's a few different factors at play in it. Of course, we're waiting to get any sort of message from Marina's Spanish soldier or
He's not a
soldier who was
Spanish
serving
soldier.
in
He's a
Spain. He was
soldier
soldier
in
serving
Spain.
in Spain. Yes. To hear if he's going to support her and the baby. Of course, then there's the forged letter that suggests that he won't. So she's then driven to find somebody else who will support the baby. So you can understand from her perspective as a woman of that time needing to find a husband quite quickly to avoid any dishonor of her name and her family. Of course, then the other side of that is, yep.
As Miss Beverington said, you marry an older man who is in want of an heir anyway, he won't ask questions.
Yeah.
But a younger guy like Colin,
who
has, as Penelope says, his whole life in front of him, is that fair? Sorry, what were you saying?
Yeah, well, and so I was going to say, so that's exactly it. So like that's the other side of it, is that while she's justified to try and find someone to support her and her baby, to sort of ensnare Colin in that way is very unfair on Colin, and especially on Penelope, who has clearly expressed that she has feelings for him, and is essentially a sister to Marina in this season. Like they're very clearly quite close.
Yeah, she's very supportive of her.
Yeah. I think is really unfair, and I think it's actually an interesting parallel to draw this plot to the Daphne plot, where again it is that sort of deception playing out. And interestingly, it's a woman. Well, I guess this is sort of the flip, isn't it? This is the woman deceiving Colin versus Simon deceiving Daphne. So you kind of get the juxtaposition of that. I think it's a really unfortunate plot because it's a very real sort of plot in the sense that clearly Marina's quite desperate and doesn't really know what to do. Yeah, and she doesn't want to marry a crusty old dude just because he's going to look after her. She wants to still be able to marry someone that she'll actually be in love with and actually be happy with. So she thinks she's kind of got the best of both worlds because she's got Colin who's proposed to her and is happy to whisk her off for a quick wedding, which will then sort of solve all her problems. Until, of course, Lady Whistledown interferes.
Yes, and reveals that Marina is pregnant to the whole of society. But yeah, there's much in this show very much focused on love and marrying for love, rather than marrying for practicality. And you get to see those who are quite young and new, so like Marina and Daphne, who are focused on being in love, juxtaposed with those who have been married for a few years and have gone, you marry for the advantageous reasons, not for love, which is interesting. But I do enjoy that Colin, when he has that meeting with Marina at Hastings' house, and he's just like, if you had told me, rather than have it be revealed by Lady Whistledown, if you told me you're pregnant and this was the situation, I still would have married you anyway. Instead, Lady Whistledown reveals it, and the family basically cuts all ties with Marina because they're trying to avoid speculation that Colin is actually the father, rather than her being actually knocked up by someone else and trying to bring shame upon the Bridgerton family. Now, you made an interesting observation because there was a point in this where I assumed, like Eloise, because I was just following Eloise around because she's amazing, that Genevieve Delacroix, so the modiste, the dressmaker, was actually Lady Whistledown. And that made so much sense because she would have known that Marina was pregnant because she was making her dresses. She probably put two or two together. And so when that gets revealed, I was like, that makes sense that it's Delacroix. But as you said, you pointed out that, what did you point out, Alex?
Is this about Penelope?
That if she had known from the beginning, that Lady Whistledown had known from the beginning, why didn't she reveal it?
Yeah, well, and that's it. I think. Well, I guess are we going to reveal that Lady Whistledown?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yes. Well, it's already
Because
all
I
over the
think,
internet. If you've been on
yes,
Netflix's social pages, it's there.
yeah, and I think the reveal that it was Penelope makes the most sense. So I think
I found that so wild.
in one sense it was a really good twist in the sense that it wasn't someone that you'd necessarily think of, but at the same time, when you piece it all together, it does make a lot of sense. And we watched that interview with Penelope's actress,
Nicola
who
Coughlan, who is
who,
fantastic. I
sort
love
of
her.
said that she did play into it throughout the season. So it's not one of those reveals where it's tacked on at the end and there's no sort of breadcrumbs through the series. You can now go back and rewatch the series and see sort of scenes where Penelope's in the background, sort of eyeing things off and making note of things in a way, sort of mentally making note of things.
Yes.
And I think, and then specifically in this situation, it does make a lot of sense as well, because as I was sort of thinking, if it was going to be somebody linked to the Featherington family, it didn't make sense that if it was a maid or someone, it didn't make sense that they would withhold this information about Marina's pregnancy until the final episode. If they've known the whole time, it's something that would have been written about much earlier. So for Whistledown to be Penelope, who's sort of been trying to find all these other ways to stop the wedding happening, and then finally,
marrying Marina.
Yeah, as a sort of measure of last resort, she finally goes, okay, well, stuff it. I'm going to have to publish it as Lady Whistledown. That's sort of it sort of makes the most sense. Yeah.
Yes, I do enjoy that throughout. Eloise is like, Lady Whistledown's so cool. She's earning her own money, but also like revealing all this great gossip and, creating all this thing and how I'd love to be like her. And Penelope's like, oh no, I could never do that. All I want to do is get married as like per the society's expectations. When all along, she's the one who is actually earning the coin.
And that's
amazing.
Yeah. And that's why I was sort of saying in our non-spoiler portion, it's going to be really interesting next season now with the audience knowing who Lady Whistledown is and not the characters. Unlike in a show like Gossip Girl, where you found out in like the last episode, now you get
so disappointing.
Yeah, and well, now you get that added layer where the creators can now have a bit of fun with it. Where
exactly,
I mean, I don't want it to get to the point where we're sort of seeing Penelope, scribbling notes and then hurriedly hiding them before someone comes in. I don't want it to be that obvious, but make it a bit of fun.
If it was that obvious, yeah, it'd be disappointing. I do want to go back now and rewatch, maybe not straight away, but eventually, and see where you can spot her out. Because even in that interview with Nicola Coughlan, and they showed some scenes from the show, and you could see her lurking behind some of these conversations when you would not have noticed her before. But now that we know she's Lady Whistledown, I'm like, oh my god, it all makes so much sense.
Yeah,
it's interesting. Yeah, well, I think that is it. Do we have anything? We've really talked about season 2. I hope there is a season 2. Here we are talking about season 2 when nothing's been announced.
I would think. Look, I mean, I'm just sort of speculating based on social media and all that sort of thing, but it seems like it's been a pretty big success. It seems like it's been received pretty positively. So I can't imagine that they're not going to come back for a second season.
No. That was what I was going to say about Lady Whistledown. Before we end this, I'll be very brief. I find it interesting the Queen is so desperate to know who Lady Whistledown is to stop a publication when the Queen seems to be like the biggest fan or consumer of what she's saying. I'm really confused by that.
But doesn't she only starts to want to stop her when she doesn't report on her party, isn't it? Isn't that
that's true.
I always think it's kind of funny that the Queen is so sort of put out that she hasn't gossiped about her party. And funnily enough, I think that's almost the clue that kind of triggers Eloise discovering or gives her a big hint to who it could be as being a link to the Featherington family, because the Featheringtons were specifically absent from that party.
Well, they weren't there for long.
Yeah.
But they didn't even mention, Lady Whistledown didn't even mention that they were turned out of the party. So I think that's also a clue that it maybe was a Featherington, because they're so ashamed that it happened. Or that she was fixated on something else. I don't know. And also shout out to Julie Andrews as the voice of Lady Whistledown. I think that is a great choice because her voice is iconic. She's an iconic actress. So hopefully that continues on for season 2 as well. it's a good show. I'm all prepped for season 2. I do have to say as well, Daphne, the actress who plays her, Phoebe Devon. Oh my god, I can't pronounce her surname.
Dinner?
Yeah, Dinner maybe. Total Keira Knightley vibes. I was just getting Keira Knightley as Elizabeth Bennet in Pride and Prejudice. Obviously,
I was getting a little
Sansa
Stark as well.
Yeah,
early season Sansa Stark.
Daphne and like Elizabeth Bennet are very different actors, but just the vibe she was giving, I was like very Keira Knightley. The Duke, I think, is everyone's new favorite male, according to what I'm seeing on social media. There was one tweet that referred to him as the plot, which was great. Gotta love those memes. You're obviously not as keen.
I can respect that he was very very visually appealing. I can respect that.
Yeah. And yeah, the Bridgerton seemed like a lovely family. I did feel for the mother and her talking about losing the husband and being a bit lonely.
And I do, yeah, probably because I think we're going to finish off by sort of speculating on season 2, even just briefly. But I do think, touching on that point, I wonder if those sorts of breadcrumbs of plot, like the father who's passed away, will sort of be expanded on quite significantly in season 2, specifically if it's going to be sort of focusing on Anthony's life.
Yes. So yeah, the second book focuses on Anthony, so we can assume season 2 will focus on Anthony. Hopefully flesh that character out a bit more. And yeah, there was that motif of the bees throughout the whole season, which bugged me because I kept seeing them and I was like, they've got to be there for a reason. Like there's a symbolism there. And according to my internet searches, I don't know if it's correct or not correct. I'm not going to read the books to find out. That the dad was actually killed by a bee sting, and that's why they've got the bees throughout. That's an odd link, but I guess it's that link back to the past. Maybe will, as you said, be explored in season 2. Fingers crossed there is a season 2. Okay, we've been talking for way too long, so let's just end this now. Thank you for listening. If you have watched it, let us know below what you thought of Bridgerton. In the comments. I'm still
give us a like, share the video around, retweet. Yeah. I'll be tweeting this out on our account, so give us a retweet and a follow would be great as well.
Okay, bye.